I was Dr. Lucas Mendez, PhD in astrophysics, the guy who lived to dismantle any talk about faith with an equation or a sharp joke. Look, I didn't just not believe in Jesus. I made a point of rubbing it in people's faces. At that conference in Tucson, Arizona, there was a panel on science and spirituality. And man, I couldn't hold myself back. I raised my hand and said, if God exists, why doesn't he just send the Hubble telescope an email with the coordinates of heaven? The crowd laughed, but I noticed my Christian colleague's face turning red. I laughed too, thinking I was the king of reason. I walked out feeling invincible, ego inflated, heart empty. But who cares about the heart when you've got logic, right? Driving alone down Highway 86, in the middle of the Sonoran Desert, the sun had been gone for hours. I was exhausted, but the adrenaline from the talk was still rushing through my veins. I turned on a militant atheist podcast, the kind that calls believers cognitively impaired. I laughed out loud, alone, drumming on the steering wheel. Life change. Purpose. That's for people who are scared of dying, I thought. My life was perfect the way it was. Published papers, invitations to speak, a minimalist apartment in Sao Paulo. Faith. To me, it was just a placebo for the masses. I was the owner of the truth, period. But deep down there was a hole. Sometimes, late at night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a void no formula could explain. I filled it with whiskey or more work, but it always came back. That night, speeding at 120 kilometers per hour through the darkness, I had no idea God's presence was about to punch me in the face. I mocked miracles, divine intervention, thought it was all coincidence or natural selection. If I die here, I turn to dust and that's it, I murmured, half joking, half serious. The desert around me was an ocean of silence, only the hum of the engine and my voice echoing inside the car. Suddenly, a coyote crossed the road. I saw the headlights reflect in its eyes, slammed on the brakes, but the car skidded off into soft sand. The world spun. I felt the impact, metal crunching, glass shattering. The car rolled once, twice, 3 times. I lost count. I hung upside down, the seatbelt holding me, blood dripping onto the roof. This is it, I thought, my heart pounding. The pain was unbearable, and the darkness outside seemed to swallow everything. Me, the rational atheist, started screaming for help. But from who, if no one else existed but me? And that's when everything changed. A bright light, out of nowhere, cut through the night like a divine beacon. I blinked, thinking it was a hallucination from blood loss. But no, it was real. And out of that light, a figure appeared, walking steadily across the sand. A man in white, calm, with a voice that seemed to pierce my soul. Lucas, this is not the end of your journey. I froze. How did he know my name? And why did I suddenly feel a peace I'd never felt before? The transformation was only beginning. I just didn't know it yet. The sound of twisting metal still echoes in my head. You know? It was like the whole world turned into a giant blender. The car went off the road, spinning through the air. I felt every hit. Roof, ground, roof again. Glass exploding, sand flying through the window, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline. I screamed, but the sound came out muffled, like the night itself had covered my mouth. The seatbelt held me, but my body swung like a rag doll. A sharp pain shot through my left leg. I think it broke. Hot blood ran from my scalp, dripping onto the roof, now the floor. I was trapped, man. The crushed dashboard pressed against my ribs, the steering wheel bent, the airbag deflated like a popped balloon. I tried to move my arm to reach the phone, but it had flown to the back seat, out of reach. The darkness outside was absolute. No moon, no stars, just the black void of the desert. My watch said 11:47 p.m. No one drove that road at that hour. I knew it. It was a forgotten route. Even by GPS, I'm gonna die here, I thought, and for the first time in my life, logic didn't help. My sharp mind now only repeated, pain, blood, end. Rescue seemed impossible. A miracle? Didn't even cross my mind. Then came the silence. After the crash, a silence so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. Fast, uneven, terrified. I coughed, choking on dust and blood. Tried to shout again. Help. Somebody. But my voice came out hoarse, weak. Me, the guy who always had an answer, now didn't even have the strength to move. The transformation Jesus was preparing for me was still just a whisper, but I could already feel something bigger than physics at play. The presence of God, the one I'd denied all my life, seemed to hover there, quiet, waiting for me to stop fighting the inevitable. Then a light. It wasn't headlights. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't anything I could explain. It was bright white, almost blinding, coming from nowhere, from the middle of the desert. I blinked, thinking it was trauma, a trick of the mind. But no. The light grew, coming closer, and with it came a gentle warmth, like someone had lit a fire inside my shattered chest. The pain was still there, but now it shared space with something else. Hope. Me, the atheist, feeling hope? That was insane. But there I was trapped, bleeding, hearing footsteps. Footsteps in the sand. Steady. Calm. Coming my way. And then I saw him. A man in white, serene face, eyes that seemed to know every corner of my soul. He knelt by the broken window, and his voice, oh, that voice, cut through the chaos like an anchor. Lucas, this is not the end of your journey. I trembled. Not from the cold, but from something I can't name. He reached out, touched my shoulder, and in an instant, the pain was gone. Not eased, gone. As if it had never existed. I blinked, confused, and when I opened my eyes again, he was gone. The light had vanished. But something inside me had been lit. The faith I'd buried so deep had begun to rise. And what came next? Not even in my wildest calculations could I have imagined it. There I was, trapped inside the overturned car, blood still dripping, pain pounding in my head like a hammer, when I saw that light. It wasn't something science could explain. Not moonlight, not distant headlights. It was alive, pulsing, cutting through the darkness of the desert as if the sky itself had opened just for me. I blinked hard, thinking it was my brain playing tricks from the trauma, but it kept getting stronger, closer. My heart, racing from panic, suddenly began to slow down, as if an invisible hand had calmed everything inside me. The presence of God, the one I'd always ignored, was right there, tangible, wrapping around me like an embrace I didn't deserve. Me, the skeptic, feeling that? It was the beginning of a transformation I couldn't have imagined. Footsteps. I heard footsteps in the sand, steady, rhythmic, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Out of that radiant light, he appeared. A man dressed in white, simple but spotless clothes, his face serene, as if he carried the peace of the whole world. He walked up to the shattered window, knelt, and looked straight into my eyes. Oh, those eyes, they seemed to see right through me, through all my sarcasm, all the times I mocked other people's faith. Lucas, he said, his voice soft yet powerful, echoing like a distant thunder. How did he know my name? I trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something like a newborn faith I was trying to suppress. He went on, "This is not the end of your journey." Simple words, but they cut through me like a blade, making room for the miracle that was happening right there. He reached out and touched my shoulder. Man, the instant his fingers made contact, the pain vanished. Not slowly, like medicine taking effect, instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. My body, which felt wrecked, suddenly felt whole. The bleeding stopped. The leg I thought was broken straightened on its own. I gasped, confused, staring at my arm that had been bleeding seconds before. "This is impossible," I whispered, but deep down I knew. This was deliverance. Jesus, the one I'd denied my whole life, was right there, in that figure, giving me a second chance. The life change I'd mocked for years was now knocking at my door, and I had nowhere to run. The light began to fade slowly, like its purpose had been fulfilled. He stood up, gave me one last look, full of love, full of mercy, and walked away, his footprints marking the sand clearly. I stayed there, still trapped, but now filled with a peace that healed the emptiness I'd carried for years. "Who are you?" I whispered, but he was already gone into the dark horizon. The transformation didn't stop there. My heart, once made of stone, now beat with a new rhythm, like it had finally found a greater purpose. I cried, man. I cried like a child, silently thanking him for the miracle that saved not just my body, but something far deeper. And then, when the light was completely gone, the desert fell silent again, but I wasn't the same. The footprints in the sand, I could see them clearly real, yet they faded a few meters away, like they'd never existed. I tried to unbuckle the seatbelt, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from awe. God's presence still lingered, inviting me into a faith I barely understood. What came next, waking up from that chaos, facing reality, would test it all. When I opened my eyes again, the rising sun painted the desert in shades of orange. I was still inside the overturned car, but whole. My body, which minutes or hours I'd lost track of time, earlier had been torn apart by pain, now moved effortlessly. I unbuckled the seatbelt with steady hands and crawled out through the broken window. The cool morning air filled my lungs as I sat on the sand, staring at the wreckage that used to be my car. Shattered glass everywhere, twisted metal, the roof crushed as if a truck had rolled over it. But me, not a scratch, not a drop of dried blood on my clothes. It was like the accident had happened to someone else. The deliverance was so obvious it hurt. It hurt because I knew I didn't deserve it. I stood up slowly, legs steady, and walked around the car. The hood was open, the engine still smoking, but nothing burned. I looked at the driver's seat, the upholstery soaked with nothing. Where was the blood? I remembered perfectly, the line of blood dripping from my forehead, falling onto the roof. But now, in the daylight, there was no stain. Not on the fabric, not on the sand. Only footprints, the footprints of the man in white, starting from nowhere and fading about 10 meters away, as if he'd vanished. I crouched down and touched the mark in the sand. It was real deep, but it ended abruptly. My heart raced again, not from fear, but from a reverence I'd never felt before. Jesus had been there. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It was pure miracle, and I was living proof. The peace that followed, man, there's no formula for that. It was like someone had lifted a ton off my shoulders. Me, who had chased awards, publications, applause, suddenly found myself laughing, alone, in the middle of the desert. Laughing at myself, at my arrogance, at all the times I called believers weak. I was the weak one. I was the blind one. And now, with a healed body and an awakened soul, I felt purpose sprouting inside me, like a green shoot growing in dry sand. The transformation wasn't just physical, it was total. My mind, once full of equations, now repeated a single phrase. Thank you. To who? I knew. To Jesus. The faith I'd buried with so much pride was now blooming effortlessly. I stayed there for a while, sitting in the sand, looking at the horizon. The silence of the desert wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with God's presence. I thought about that conference, the jokes, the way I treated that Christian colleague. If I could go back, I'd do it all differently. I'd apologize. I'd listen. I'd learn. But right then, I understood. The rescue wasn't just from the crash. It was from the life I'd been living, from the spiritual death I'd embraced. I cried again, but now with tears of gratitude. The transformation had only just begun, and I couldn't wait to tell the world what Jesus had done for me. But now what? The car was destroyed, I was miles from any town, no cell signal. How was I going to get out of there? Was the miracle only physical, or did Jesus have more to show me? I stood up, brushed the sand off my pants, and started walking toward where the footprints had disappeared. Something told me the journey was far from over. I started walking down the road, the sun already burning the back of my neck, but my body felt light, like I was 20 again. The car was far behind me, just a black dot on the horizon, and I kept moving forward, no fear, no rush. Every now and then, I looked back at my footprints fading in the sand and smiled. A real smile, something I hadn't done since I was a kid. Each step was a wordless prayer. Thank you, Jesus. The faith I once thought was weakness had become my compass. The desert, once a symbol of emptiness, now felt like a sanctuary. I could feel God's presence in every grain of sand, in every gust of hot wind. The deliverance wasn't just from the accident. It was from the loneliness I had cultivated with pride. After about 2 hours, I saw dust rising in the distance, a highway patrol jeep. My heart jumped, not from panic, but from expectation. When they stopped, the officer got out with his hand on his holster, thinking I was some lunatic wandering the desert. Sir, what happened? Where's your car? I pointed toward the horizon. He frowned, radio in hand. Dispatch, possible accident on Highway 86, mile marker 42. Victim walking, no visible injuries. Victim walking? I laughed to myself. They put me in the back seat, handed me a bottle of water, and I drank it like it was the first sip of my life. On the way to the hospital in Tucson, I told them everything, the crash, the light, the man in white. The older officer, a Mexican guy with a gray mustache, just shook his head. I've heard stories like that before, Doc. The desert keeps its secrets. When we got to the ER, chaos broke loose. Nurses running, the on-call doctor yelling for x-rays, CT scans, blood work. I kept trying to explain. You don't need to, I'm fine. But nobody listened. They laid me on the stretcher, cut off my shirt, wiped me with alcohol, and then stopped. My skin was clean. No bruises, no cuts. The doctor, a man in his 50s with thick glasses, examined me like I was an alien. Impossible. You said you rolled over 3 times. I nodded. He asked for the accident report, photos of the car, sent by the patrol. When he saw the wreck, his face went pale. This would have killed anyone. Compound fractures, internal bleeding. How? I smiled. A miracle. He wrote down, patient asymptomatic, tests normal, and released me 2 hours later. No cast, no stitches, no meds. As I was leaving, a nurse handed me a paper. Your blood works perfect, doctor. Not even anemia. I took the paper, read the numbers, everything normal. But what shocked me was the timestamp. Sample collected, 7:14 a.m. I had arrived at the hospital at 6:50. How could they have drawn blood before I even got there? I asked the nurse, and she just shrugged. Automatic system, probably a mistake. I folded the paper, heart pounding. Another deliverance. Jesus wasn't only in the desert, he was in the details, in the impossible. The transformation was now public. Me, the well-known atheist, walking out of the hospital without a scratch, with a totaled car miles away. But what was I supposed to do with all this? I had a lecture scheduled that afternoon at the same conference. Go back and talk about black holes? Or go on stage and tell what really happened? The change wasn't just a theory anymore, it was a decision, and the next choice would define who I'd be from that moment on. I went back to my hotel in Tucson by taxi. The driver talked about Mexican soccer the whole ride, and I just nodded, staring out the window, still processing everything. My shirt was torn, my pants full of sand, but my body was whole. No pain, no mark. I got to my room, took a long shower, and let the hot water wash away the smell of gasoline and fear. When I looked at myself in the mirror, clean, eyes more alive than ever, I smiled. I smiled at Jesus, the one I now knew. Thank you for saving me, I whispered. Faith wasn't theory anymore. It was skin, blood, breath. I put on clean clothes, my conference badge, and headed to the auditorium. My 2 p.m. lecture, Black Holes and the Illusion of Infinity. Pure irony. The lobby was packed. Colleagues greeted me. Where were you yesterday, Lucas? You vanished after the panel. I smiled, shook hands, but inside me there was a volcano. I sat in the front row, waiting for my turn. The speaker before me was talking about ethics in research, and I barely listened. My mind replayed the crash, the light, the voice. It's not the end of your journey yet. It was now. When they called my name, I walked up to the stage with steady legs, the microphone cold in my hand. The crowd applauded, around 300 scientists, skeptics just like I had been. I took a deep breath, looked at my slide on the screen, and turned it off. Sorry, but today I won't talk about physics. I'm going to talk about a miracle. Silence. A silence so thick you could hear the air conditioner hum. I started from the beginning. The empty road, the crash, the blood, the pain. I told them about the light, the man in white, the voice that knew my name. I was an atheist. I mocked those of you who had faith. I thought purpose was an illusion, that transformation was self-help nonsense. But Jesus met me in the desert. He healed me. He gave me a second chance. I showed the photos the patrol had sent to my email, the destroyed car. Then I lifted my shirt, smooth skin. Medical exams, 0 injury. This isn't coincidence. It's the presence of God. Someone in the audience laughed nervously. Another started recording. The evangelical colleague I had humiliated days earlier was crying in the third row. I spoke for 40 minutes straight. I told them about the emptiness I used to fill with research papers and whiskey, about the change that started right there in the sand. I didn't deserve it, but the love of Jesus doesn't ask for resumes. At the end, I made an invitation. If you doubt, that's okay. I used to doubt too. But try. Ask. He answers. The applause came hesitant at first, then stronger. Some stood up. Others walked out murmuring. The organizer, pale, came up to pull me off the stage. Lucas, this is a scientific conference. I smiled. Exactly. And science can't explain what happened to me. I left with my heart rejoicing, but I knew. The transformation was now public, and the price would come with it. Outside, reporters surrounded me. Microphones, cameras, questions. Was it a hallucination? A publicity stunt? I answered calmly. Go to the site. See the footprints that disappear. Read the reports. But what I really wanted was to go back to Brazil, to my old life, and burn everything that didn't belong anymore. Faith was fire now. And the next step? Tell my family, my students, the world. But how do you start a new life when your past still screams? I returned to Brazil 3 days later. But the Lucas who stepped off the plane wasn't the same one who had boarded. I got out of the taxi at Guarulhos Airport, looked up at the gray Sao Paulo sky, and said out loud, Jesus, this is where it really begins. I got home, opened my closet, took out the whiskey bottles, the Dawkins books, the trophies for best atheist speaker, and put everything in a box. Donate it. Burn it. Whatever. The transformation no longer fit on shelves. I called the university dean. I'm resigning. He thought I was crazy. You're at your peak, Lucas. I laughed. Exactly. But the peak is different now. I hung up. The deliverance in the desert had given me the courage to leave behind what had been killing me slowly. The following Sunday, I walked into a small church in the Ipiranga neighborhood. Just me, jeans and a t-shirt. No suit, no title, no resume. The pastor was a former addict who spoke with a thick northeastern accent. When he opened the microphone for testimonies, I raised my hand. I told everything, the mockery, the crash, the light, the voice, the hospital, the conference. The whole church was in tears. At the end of the service, he called me up. Do you want to be baptized today? I didn't even think. I do. I stepped into the cold water of the baptismal tank, my heart pounding like a drum. When I came up, the church shouted hallelujah, and I cried like a child. Faith was no longer theory. It was a plunge, the death of the old Lucas, a resurrection. God's presence wrapped around me like never before. I started to speak. First in church, then at youth services, then in public squares. People would stop to listen. The scientist who died and came back. I shared about the miracle, about the purpose Jesus had given me, to bring hope to those who doubt.